Okay, so in this tutorial we are going to be covering our Blink Blink circuit swatchbook, where we have a paper circuit, a sewable circuit, and a pressure sensor. Along with your swatchbook, you got a couple of items: copper tape, LEDs, 2 batteries, conductive thread, and a needle. Other helpful tools to have next to you while you're doing this are scissors, tweezers, and nail polish, or any type of adhesive like glue or hot glue. Okay, so the first circuit we're going to start with is the paper circuit on the far left. You're going to need the 2 pieces of copper tape, an LED, and a battery. The first step is to take a look at the LED and color the shorter leg. That's the negative leg. That's just to help us remember which leg is negative and which leg is positive when we start putting the circuit together. So after you color it, then we're going to bend the LED legs. This is just so we can put it flat down onto the paper, and it's easier to tape, and there's a stronger connection between the copper tape and the LED legs. As you can see, the black leg, the negative leg, is following along that negative side of the circuit, which is going to match up with the bottom of the battery. The bottom of the battery is negative, and the top of the battery with the plus sign is positive. So the next step is to use the copper tape to tape down the negative path of the circuit. So if you grab one piece of copper tape, you'll see that that white backing peels off, and the other side of the copper tape is sticky, so it works just like normal tape. So we're going to start peeling it off, and I'm going to start with the negative leg and just set the tape right on top of that leg and press down firmly, making sure that the tape sticks to the paper and also to the LED leg. You want to make sure that connection is really solid. If you can follow your circuit so that the copper tape stays as one solid piece, that's helpful in making it a more solid connection. And I'm just going to keep going until I get to the center of this gray circle and tear it off. So that's going to be the negative side of the circuit, and the battery can just sit right on top. I'm also going to take my finger and just press along the circuit, make sure that everything is solid. So before we lay down the positive side of the circuit, we want to just test it really quickly. So I'm going to take the battery, set it down on top of the copper tape, then I'm going to take another loose piece of copper tape and connect the positive side of the battery to the positive leg of the LED. And you see when I press down onto the LED, it lights up because I'm completing the circuit. So good news, the circuit works. And we can tape down the other side, the positive side. So now I need to connect that positive leg of the LED to the top of the battery, the positive side of the battery. So I'm going to get my other piece of copper tape, start peeling it off. Again, I'm going to tape down the leg of the LED and make sure the connection's really strong. And I'm following along the diagram that's on the piece of paper, but you can make whatever shape you want with the copper tape. As long as the positive side of the circuit and the negative side don't cross, then you can make whatever shape you want with the copper tape. In this last part here, I'm just going to tape over to the top of the battery, which is again is the positive side, and you'll see the light go on once I make that connection. So with this extra piece of copper tape, I'm actually going to fold it back over just so there isn't any sticky, which makes it actually more like a switch. So then it's like a tab. I can lift the battery up off the paper and set it back down, and then you'll see the light go on and off. Okay, great. Now we're going to move on to the second circuit, which is our sewable circuit. For this, you'll need an LED, a needle, and conductive thread. So again, the first step we want to do is to color the negative leg of the LED. So we're going to get a Sharpie and color the short leg, which is the negative leg. After this, we're going to be bending the legs again, so it's really helpful to always start out by coloring that negative leg. Okay, so now that we've colored the leg, I'm going to grab a pair of tweezers so that I can use the tweezers to loop both of the legs of the LED. This is so it makes it easier for the conductive thread. It's easier to tie through the legs. So we loop the legs so they have little circles with a wire, and then we can thread the conductive thread through those loops. So I'm going to take the tweezers and just bend each leg over like this so that I have a circle formed with each leg. And if you don't have tweezers, we've also been able to do this with scissors or a pair of pliers as well. Alright, so now both legs of the LED are looped and bent out a little bit just so that we make sure they don't touch each other. And now we're going to be ready to loop the conductive thread through the wire loop of the LED. So the next step is going to be to thread the needle, and then I'm going to tie the thread in a knot and tie it to the positive leg of the LED. I'm going to loop it through a couple of times again just to make sure it's a really strong connection with the conductive thread to the leg of the LED. And tie an extra knot, and now it's time to stitch it to the paper. So I'm going to use the needle to just poke right through the paper, and that way I'll be starting to attach the LED to the paper. Okay, so now the positive leg of the LED is going to connect to the conductive thread. So I'm going to stitch that to the conductive thread, and then on the bottom I'm going to again stitch between the conductive thread and the positive side of the battery holder, and that will complete the positive side of the circuit. So I'm going to keep going with the same thread and needle. And the next step is going to be to stitch directly into the copper fabric. Now you only really need to go through it one time, but again, just to make sure that it's a really strong connection, I'm going to thread through the copper fabric a couple of times and then tie a really solid knot. Okay, great. So now the positive leg of the LED is connected to the conductive fabric. Okay, so the next step is going to be to connect the copper fabric to the positive side of the battery holder. So the battery holder has a metal tab on the side with a hole in it, and that part's conductive. So what we can do is sew right into that tab. So I'm going to use the same needle and thread, conductive thread. And I'm just going to poke a hole. I'm going to thread the needle through the metal tab of the battery holder. and go straight into the paper. And I'm going to do this a couple of times to make sure that the conductive thread makes strong contact with the battery holder. Now I'm going to go with that same needle and thread. I'm going to connect it to the copper fabric, and again just loop through a couple of times. Okay, so now I have the positive side of my circuit completed. It's stitched from the positive leg of the LED to the conductive fabric, and then the conductive fabric is stitched to the positive side of the battery holder. So the electricity can flow through the conductive fabric, and that is the positive side of the circuit. So before we finish the negative side of the circuit, we're just going to test. So I'm going to grab some copper thread, and I'm going to just loosely loop it over the negative side, and then I'm going to put the thread so it's touching the tab on the other side of the battery holder, which is the negative side. So as you see, when the thread touches that metal tab, the light goes on. Another cool thing is the needle is also conductive, so if you actually just touch it with the needle, you can see the light goes on. And so our circuit will work. So now we just need to do that same thing, but we're going to use the conductive thread to stitch the negative side of the LED into the paper, and then follow that side of the circuit and stitch it into the negative side of the battery holder. So again, starting with the negative side of the LED, I'm just going to loop the conductive thread through. Loop it through a couple of times, tie some knots, make sure it's a solid connection, and now I'm going to stitch through the paper. Again, I'm following along the gray diagram that's on the paper, just because it's easiest, but feel free to stitch whatever shape you like, as long as that negative side touches the negative tab of the battery holder. Okay, so almost done. I'm just going to loop through again a couple of times to make sure that the connection on this negative side of the battery holder is a solid connection. Tie a knot. Great, and that's our sewable circuit. So as you can see, now that it's all connected, the light is on, and the electricity is flowing through the battery, the conductive thread, and the conductive fabric. One last thing, we're going to use the nail polish, and on all four of the joints where the conductive thread is looping through the legs of the LED and looping through those metal tabs on the battery holder, I'm just going to dab it with the nail polish to make sure it helps adhere the conductive thread to the metal and gives it a more solid connection. Okay, so the last circuit is using a pressure sensor. So again, the first thing we want to do is color the negative side of the LED, the negative leg, so that we can always keep track of which leg is negative and which leg is positive. Then I'm going to grab my tweezers and use those to bend the LED legs into loops, so each leg is a separate loop. Okay, great. So this is very similar to the sewable circuit. What we're going to do is, using conductive thread, we're going to attach the positive leg of the LED to the positive side of the battery holder. Then we're going to attach the negative leg of the LED to the pressure sensor right here. So we can sew directly into the copper tape. The bottom of the pressure sensor we're going to connect to the negative side of the battery holder. Okay, so we're going to take our needle and conductive thread, we're going to loop it through the positive leg of the LED. tie it off with a knot. And then stitch it to the paper. Okay, so I'm just going to keep stitching it to the paper along this orange line and then attach it to the positive side of the battery holder by threading it through that metal tab, the circle in the metal tab. I'm going to loop it through a couple of times and then tie a knot. Okay, great. So that actually completes the positive side of our circuit. So the positive leg of the LED is now attached to the positive side of the battery holder. So the next step is to connect the negative leg of the LED to the top of the pressure sensor. So the top of the pressure sensor is a little tab of copper tape that's sticking out. If you want to learn how to make a pressure sensor, you can check the link in the description of this video. We have a cram session that walks you through what velostat is and how to make a pressure sensor of your own. Okay, so now that I've threaded the negative side of the LED and looped it through, I'm going to take this same piece of thread and sew right into the copper tape. Again, I'm going to do this a couple of times and loop through to make sure that the connection's really strong with the copper tape. Now I'm going to connect the bottom tab of the pressure sensor, so that bottom piece of copper tape, I'm going to connect that to the negative side of the battery holder. So again, I'm going to sew right into this copper tape and loop through a couple of different times. Tie a knot here. Okay, and now I can go directly to the negative side of the battery holder. I'm just gonna thread that metal tab and again loop through a couple of times. Okay, great. So just tie this off here. And now that completes the negative side of our circuit. So the last step we need to do is add the battery. So I want to pull the battery out of the sewable circuit and then plop it right here into our pressure sensor circuit, and voila! When I push on the pressure sensor, you'll see the LED light up. So what's happening is the harder I press, the less resistive it is and the more electricity that it's allowed to flow through. So you'll see the LED light up more the harder I press. And there we have our three circuits: our paper circuit, our sewable circuit, and our pressure sensor. Thanks for watching!